On January 3rd, 2026, at exactly 2:01 a.m., American helicopters landed in Caracas. 30 minutes later, the president of Venezuela was in custody. And on that very night, oil reserves worth $17.3 trillion USD changed hands. But this is not just about Venezuela. This was not an isolated military operation. This was an unavoidable step in a pattern that has repeated itself for over 2,000 years. A pattern that has ultimately destroyed every great world power. At this moment, U.S. national debt stands at over $38.5 trillion, growing by more than $6 billion per day. For the first time in history, annual interest payments have surpassed $1 trillion. And in this year alone, 142,000 millionaires are quietly leaving traditional wealth centers. This is not a coincidence. This is phase 4 of a 7-stage cycle, the same cycle that destroyed the Roman denarius, the Dutch guilder, and later the British pound. The move on Venezuela was not the beginning. It is a symptom, a sign that an empire has begun desperately reaching for real resources to maintain the illusion of financial stability. What happens next is already written in the history books. The only open question is this: which side of the greatest wealth transfer in human history will you be on? Stay with me, because once you recognize this pattern, you will never see the world the same way again. Over the past 2,000 years, empires have always risen and fallen according to the same sequence. The same order, the same phases, the same ending. It makes no difference whether we are talking about Rome in 265 AD, the Netherlands in 1780, Great Britain in 1931, or the United States today. The pattern is identical, and it is unfolding right now. This is how it works. Phase 1. Sound money. Real value. Every empire begins with money that has intrinsic value. Gold, silver, real assets. The currency is backed by something tangible. This attracts trade. Capital flows in, productivity rises. Education, innovation, and infrastructure expand. Wealth is created through real output, not financial engineering. This is the golden age. The foundation is real. Phase 2. Expansion and social programs. As wealth grows, expansion begins. Militarily, economically, socially, roads, bridges, healthcare, education, welfare programs. The middle class expands. Living standards rise noticeably. But quietly, something critical begins to shift. The state starts managing more wealth than it actually produces. Consumption grows faster than productivity. Phase 3. Overextension and debasement. To maintain its global position, the empire must project power. Military bases, alliances, conflicts, costs explode. Taxes rise, but they are never enough. So the empire makes the same decision every time. It debases the currency. In ancient Rome, the silver content of coins was reduced. Today, money is printed, the effect is identical. More money chases the same amount of goods. Inflation begins, at first barely noticeable. But trust starts to erode. Foreign creditors take notice. They diversify, quietly at first, then systematically. And this is exactly where acceleration begins. In phase 4, the system tips. The empire realizes that its currency is losing credibility. Not suddenly, but irreversibly. And at this point, all empires react the same way. They begin hunting for real value, raw materials, energy, strategic resources, anything with intrinsic worth. Military operations become resource missions, regime changes receive new justifications, security, stability, democracy. But beneath the surface, it is about one thing only: securing real assets to support an increasingly hollow financial system. This is exactly where we are today. Venezuela holds 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. At approximately $57 per barrel, that equals $17.3 trillion USD. On January 3rd, 2026, the United States took control of these reserves through a military operation, including the detention of the sitting president. This is not an outlier. This is textbook economics of an empire in Phase 4. And here is the critical point. Phase 4 stabilizes nothing. It buys time. 5 to 15 years, sometimes less. Because while the empire secures resources abroad, internal problems accelerate. The structural cause remains unchanged. Spending permanently exceeds productive capacity. Phase 4 is not a turning point, it is a warning signal. And that is exactly why what comes next is inevitable. In Phase 5, the problem becomes visible, not in statistics, but in everyday life. Prices rise noticeably. Savings lose purchasing power. Wages can no longer keep up. The middle class realizes the system no longer works in its favor. Wealth concentrates. Those who own real assets hold their ground. Those who hold cash lose. Social cohesion begins to fracture. Political extremes gain support. Blame becomes widespread. And while the general population is still debating, the wealthy are already acting. 142,000 millionaires relocate their capital in this year alone, the largest voluntary capital migration in modern history, not out of panic, but out of pattern recognition. At the same time, states diversify their reserves. Less dollars, more gold, more bilateral agreements outside the dominant system. This is not a collapse. This is fading trust. And this is exactly where the game finally tips. In Phase 6, the system becomes mathematically unstable. Debt levels grow so large that interest payments alone consume a significant portion of government revenue. The state loses its freedom to act, and the central bank faces an unsolvable choice. Raise interest rates to fight inflation, debt becomes unmanageable. Keep interest rates low to finance the state. The currency rapidly loses purchasing power. This is fiscal dominance. Debt dictates monetary policy. This exact risk was publicly warned about in early January 2026. The conditions for fiscal dominance were clearly visible. Translated, the transition from Phase 5 to Phase 6 has begun. From this point on, no political decision is truly free. Everything serves only one goal: buying time. But time cannot be bought indefinitely. Phase 7 is the end of the cycle. It arrives when trust disappears completely. At that point, there are only two possible outcomes: hyperinflation or sovereign default. History has never recorded a third path. The currency loses its value. Savings evaporate within months. Lifelong reserves disappear. But wealth does not vanish. It changes sides. Real assets explode in value relative to the collapsing currency. Gold, silver, productive land, strategic resources. This is the great wealth transfer. Not new, not even rare. It happened to Rome, it happened to the Netherlands, it happened to Great Britain, and every time the same thing occurred. Those who trusted the system lost. Those who understood the pattern survived. The reset is not an accident. It is the conclusion of a mathematical process. The Roman Empire Rome dominated the Mediterranean world for nearly 500 years. The denarius was the reserve currency of its time. In 64 AD, it contained 94% silver. But wars, administration, and expansion were expensive. The silver content was gradually reduced. 100 AD, 85%, 200 AD, 50%, 265 AD, 0.5%. The consequences were brutal. Prices exploded. Soldiers' wages had to be raised constantly. Taxes increased. Trade collapsed. Those who owned land or gold survived. Those who held denarii lost everything. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire disappeared. The Dutch Empire. In the 17th century, the guilder became the first modern reserve currency. Amsterdam was the center of global trade. But colonies, fleets, and wars led to overextension. In 1780, the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War began. Trade routes were destroyed. The result? Sovereign default. Market collapse. Loss of reserve currency status. Wealth migrated from the Netherlands to Great Britain. The British Empire. The pound sterling dominated for over 200 years, but two world wars destroyed its financial foundation. 1931, abandonment of the gold standard. 1967, major devaluation. The transition took decades, but it was irreversible. Those who held real assets survived. The broader population lost purchasing power. 3 empires, 3 centuries. The same pattern, the same outcome. The United States fulfilled Phase 1 perfectly after 1944. Bretton Woods. The dollar was tied to gold. 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Sound money, a real foundation. Phase 2 followed immediately. The welfare state, infrastructure, education, industry, an exploding middle class. Then came overextension. The Vietnam War, the Cold War, military bases in more than 80 countries. In 1971, the gold window was closed. The dollar became pure fiat money. That was the moment of debasement. The inflation of the 1970s was the direct result. The dollar survived only through a temporary fix. The petrodollar system. Oil for dollars, military protection in exchange for demand. That extended phase 3, but it did not end the cycle. And now we are here. Iraq, Libya, Syria, and now Venezuela. Oil reserves worth $17.3 trillion taken through military means. This is not an anomaly. This is classic Phase 4 behavior. An empire securing real assets because trust in the financial system is fading. Venezuela changes nothing about the debt trajectory. It is a patch, not a solution. And that is exactly why the cycle continues to move forward. When trust erodes, it shows up first in capital, not in headlines, but in movement. In 2025 alone, 142,000 millionaires moved their wealth internationally. For 2026, 165,000 are expected, the largest voluntary wealth migration in modern history. Where's the capital going? To countries with stability, low taxes, clear property rights, political predictability. At the same time, the dollar is gradually losing dominance. Its share of global currency reserves has declined significantly since 2000. States are diversifying. More gold, more bilateral trade, more settlement outside the traditional system. This is not a collapse. This is erosion. Trust does not disappear overnight. It dissolves layer by layer. And that is exactly what shows us where we are in the cycle. The numbers are relentless. U.S. government debt stands at over $38.5 trillion and continues to grow every single day. Annual interest payments have surpassed $1 trillion for the first time. That is more than the total defense spending of many major powers. From this point on, politics loses its power, because every option makes the problem worse. Higher interest rates, debt becomes unmanageable. Lower interest rates, the currency's purchasing power collapses. The system is trapped. Not ideologically, but mathematically. Projections show that under current assumptions, debt levels will rise to ranges that have historically always led to monetary breakdowns. This is not a prediction. This is arithmetic. And that is precisely why the next transition is approaching. History does not provide an exact date, but it does provide ranges. Once a system enters Phase 6, it has historically taken 5 to 25 years for the final break to occur. Sometimes faster, when trust suddenly collapses. Sometimes slower, when the system is artificially supported. The trigger is rarely dramatic, not a single event. But a break in confidence, a failed bond auction, a sudden interest rate hike, capital controls, or the loss of reserve currency status. Collapse does not begin with panic, it begins with doubt. And that is precisely why this transition is so dangerous. Most people recognize it only when it is already far advanced. When people recognize this pattern, the reaction is almost always the same. This time is different. Technology will solve everything. AI, automation, innovation, productivity. But this has been said every single time. Rome possessed revolutionary technology. Roads, aqueducts, concrete, engineering mastery. Great Britain led the Industrial Revolution. Both empires were technologically ahead of their time. And yet they followed the same cycle. Why? Because the problem is not productivity. It is the relationship between spending and income. When a state consistently spends 6 to 7% of GDP more than it takes in, no technology can compensate for that. Even reserve currency status saves nothing. It delays the decline and makes the final break larger. Printing money does not create wealth, it reallocates it, from those who hold money to those who are allowed to spend it first. This is not a failure of technology, this is mathematics. History is unambiguous on this point. In every monetary transition, wealth did not change sides randomly. Real assets survived, currencies did not. Gold, silver, productive land, strategic resources. In Rome, landowners survived. At the fall of the guilder, gold holders preserved their purchasing power. During the decline of the pound, hard assets protected wealth from erosion. But wealth alone is not enough. Skills survive every currency: medicine, engineering, agriculture, skilled trades, services that people will always need. Those who can create value retain income, regardless of the monetary system. There is another factor: optionality. Second residences, international structures, access to multiple legal systems, not out of ideology, but out of risk management. What stands out is this: these are exactly the actions being taken today by those who recognize the cycle early. When people see this pattern, they usually understand it immediately. And then, nothing happens. This is not a lack of information. It is normalcy bias. This won't happen in my lifetime. Someone will fix it. The government won't let it go that far. That is exactly what the Romans believed, and the British, and every society at the end of a cycle. Mathematical processes do not care about beliefs. They continue to run, regardless of hope or confidence. The most dangerous moment is not the collapse, it is the phase before it. Because everything still feels stable enough to change nothing. The operation in Venezuela was not the cause of the wealth transfer. It was a signal. When empires reach phase 4, they begin securing real assets: oil, raw materials, strategic resources, not out of strength, but out of necessity. A system that is truly stable does not need to do this. History clearly shows what comes next: more capital flight, more inflation, more social tension, more control. Not suddenly, step by step. The great wealth transfer is not an event, it is a process. Most people will only recognize it when it is nearly complete. You now have a choice. Ignore the pattern and hope that this time is different, or understand it and position yourself accordingly. Because one thing has never changed in 2,000 years: this time is never different. The question is not whether the transfer will happen. The question is which side you will be on when it is complete.